So this week we're going to start talking about a really tricky, deceptively tricky issue in the field of politics of education, and that's equality of education. I don't think it's controversial for people to say that they're for equality in education. Particularly a lot of people, politicians, people on the street, say that they're for equality of opportunity in education. But the difficulty is in the details. People could be for equality of opportunity in education, but when you quiz different people on kind of what they mean and you ask them to articulate what they mean, they often turn out to mean kind of different things. Generally, the gut level feeling is that we all believe that everyone should get what they deserve educationally. So that might mean things like really academically good students who do their work and persevere should get, higher marks than students who don't put in the effort or maybe aren't as academically good. We also mean things like that education shouldn't hinge on what people might call luck factors beyond your control. The quality of your education shouldn't be dictated by the color of your skin. The quality of your education shouldn't be dictated by how much money your family has. Stuff like that. That's what people mean. But the devil is really in the details. Take, two different kinds of students. What does it mean to say these two different kinds of students should have equal opportunity to education? Maybe one student has mild or severe autism. Another student might only have a generalized learning disability. A third student may have none of these. What does it mean to say that these students should receive equal opportunity to education when the education that's best for them may actually be different? So we're going to explore a little bit of that, and I have some readings for you. But first I want to talk a little bit about different meanings of the term equality and equity. So first let's start with a definition of equality. This is something I got kind of from composites from the dictionary. So equality roughly means the state of being equal, especially in status, rights, and opportunities. More namely, equality refers to the sameness of something. So when I say that we have equal opportunities of due process under the law, what I'm saying is that that if we brought cases, we would be treated the same under the law as each other. If I say that we have equal incomes, of course that means that we have equal take-home pay or whatever it is. If I was to say we have equal heights, that means that we have the same height. And similarly, if I say we have equal opportunity, it's meant to say that we have the same opportunity. But there are different formations of what equality requires and what equality means. So let's go with the strongest first. This is usually the equality of dystopian novels. So you guys read Harrison Bergeron. There are some other stories like L.P. Hartley's Facial Justice, which is a dystopian novel about people who are required to undergo facial surgery so that everyone has an equal level of beauty and no one's more beautiful than anyone else. The reason that this kind of equality is sameness is the lore of dystopian novels is because if we're all supposed to have the same something, that's really hard to do in a world where we're all diverse and we're all different, unless equality is supposed to trump the idea of liberty or the idea of diversity. So if I'm more talented in something than someone else is, the only way that we could make everyone equal is to either bring them up, bring me down, or some combination of both. And there are very few people that would say that equality is justified in the case where people have different talents. So not many people want the world of Harrison Bergeron, where people who are really strong are required to wear leg weights to bring them down to other people's level, or people who are really short wear stilts so that they can be brought up to the average height. Very few people want the world of L.P. Hartley's Facial Justice, where people who are more beautiful, so to speak, than others are required to have facial surgery to make them uglier, or vice versa, that people who are not as beautiful as other people are required to have facial surgery to bring them up to a standard level. Because that interferes with individuality, that interferes with diversity, that interferes with individuals' right to be an individual. So very few people advocate for a really hard version of equality. More people are likely to advocate for an idea of equality of opportunity. And this really means that everyone has the same opportunities. So instead of saying everyone should have the same income or everyone should have the same level of strength, we're saying everyone should have the same opportunities for success. This is a pretty uncontroversial idea, and the best way to illustrate it is with a race. When different people run a race, it's only fair that they run the same length. if you expect this person to run farther than the other person, they don't really have equal chances of success and opportunities. So what we generally say is that everyone should kind of have the same chances of success when running a race, that they should be required to run the same distance. But even that's not going to be sufficient for a lot of people, because if you think about a professional runner and an amateur runner running the same race, it would be strange to say that it would be an equal opportunity for us to run the same distance. It's very obvious that the professional runner has a way better chance of success when the professional and the amateur runner are treated the same. So in some ways, what we want to say is that while it seems fair that everyone runs the same distance, it may actually be fair to treat people differently. If you're an amateur runner, the only way you could have the same chances of success at a race would be to run a shorter distance than the professional runner. Only in that way would the race be quote unquote fair. But those are two different conceptions of equality of opportunity. Now we get to the idea of equity. And equity is slightly different than equality. Instead of saying that everyone should be treated the same in some way, or that everyone has the same something, equity is just the idea that everyone should be treated fairly, that everyone should be given what they deserve. The results don't have to be equal as long as the results are fair. This was really brought home by a philosopher in the 20th century named John Rawls, who wrote a famous book called Justice as Fairness. And the way he imagined justice as fairness is like this. Imagine that we're creating a policy or policies for a fair world. The best way to do that would be that everyone is blind to their own circumstance. No one knows whether they're rich or poor, whether they're black or white, whether they're in lower class neighborhood, upper class neighborhood, whether they have a tendency towards alcoholism or not, etc. And he said that a just world is a world where if you didn't know your place in society, whether you're rich or poor, black or white, etc., you would still fare okay in that society. So again, the idea is that if you were behind that veil of ignorance and you didn't know who you were in society, you would still be treated fair. And this idea has intuitive appeal because it basically means that if you are on the low end of the totem pole, you're from a poor neighborhood, you are from a family of domestic abuse and alcoholism, or whatever the case is, you would still fare okay in that society. Now notice that this has nothing to do with equality. It's not to say that everyone has the same shot at success. It's not to say that everyone is equal. It's not to say that outcomes will be equal. All it is to say that if you are at a low spot on the totem pole socially, you will be treated okay. You'll be treated fairly, justly. You will, get a decent amount. And in some ways, that's the best way to think of equality of opportunity in education, because oftentimes that's what we mean. When we're talking about educational equality, we don't mean that we all want schools to be equally as good. What we usually mean is that we want the schools in lower income areas and under-resourced areas to be decent. We're not saying that we want the schools in rich areas to be of the quality of the lower income areas. Some people would go that far, other people wouldn't. What we're saying, though, is that whoever you are, you should have a decent education, even if other people have a better education than you. Think of it this way. Paris Hilton makes a lot of money doing things that maybe don't require a whole lot of effort. She starred in reality TV shows. She gets money for showing up at parties and promoting different things. I don't make nearly as much as she does, and my work, arguably, is harder than hers is. But no one in the Rawlsian camp is saying that we have to be equal. All we're saying is that my situation has to be decent. The fact that she makes 50,000 more times than I do doesn't really materially affect my situation. As long as I'm treated decently, that's okay for the idea of equity. So now let's think about this in terms of schools and how schools should be funded. One way of equality would be to say that every school should get $13,000 per student per year. That means that every student has equal funding and that students are truly treated equally under that funding process. But there's a problem with that. The problem with that is in a poorer area, it may actually cost more money to get students up to the same standard as in a rich area where students come from really enriched environments. They have a lot of books in their house. They have parents who are well educated. So 13,000 a year seems fair in some ways, but in other ways, it's like expecting the professional runner and the amateur runner to run the same distance and saying that that's fair. It may be that we should give poorer students more money than richer students. So another way to think about this is on the individual level of students. It's hardly clear what it would mean to say that these two students would be treated equally if we gave them the same amount of resources. One student has ADHD, a reading disability, and comes from a poor background. Another student has no diagnosed disabilities and is from an upper middle class background, and maybe her parents are more educated. Is it fair to say that since we give them the same amount of time to do any particular assignment, that we're treating them fairly? Again, that's like saying that the professional and amateur runner should run the same distance in the race and that they have equal opportunity. Clearly, if we give these two students the same assignment and the same amount of time, the one on the right is going to have a lot better chance of success. So special education programs come about so that we can give accommodations to the student on the left. The student on the left will have maybe extended time, may have someone be able to read the instructions to him, whereas the other student doesn't have that, might have some scaffolding on assignments that isn't available to the student on the right. So which one's fair? Should they be treated the same, or should they be treated according to what each of them deserves in a fashion more aligned with equity? So that's the interesting question. The next question that we're going to look at when we look at schools, when we look at choice and individual choice and how that plays in, is it even meaningful to say that students with different aptitudes, abilities, and interests can find equality in the same school? If a student is mildly autistic and another student is not mildly autistic, or let's say that a student is really interested in and has an aptitude for the mechanical arts and another student doesn't, can we really say that students can be equal in any particular school under the same standards? Because what is a good standard for a student who doesn't have autism may not be a good standard for students who have autism. And what may be a good standard for a student who really enjoys working with their hands in mechanical arts is not the same standard that we should apply to a student who's really bookish and academic and loves to read. So then there's the following question. Can we even judge whether very different educations are truly equal or equitable? So let's say that one student does really well in and flourishes in Eastside Catholic School, and another student does really well in Discovery Montessori School. What does it even mean to say that those educations are equal? Because the educations are different. And one thing we learned in this video is that to say that two educations are equal means they're the same in some way. And it's really hard to judge whether two very different educations can be the same. So that's a brief whirligig tour of some of the complexities with talking about the ideas of equality and equity in education.